live, and now we are live. We're all live, and now we're live. Welcome back, everybody. We are here for another one of your questions about work. And actually, Noah, if you want to go to my Twitter and retweet this live, then your followers can join in live. And we have a very special day today because we're going to start with a general question. For those of you who are here for the first time, I'm Roy. I'm a startup investor in the future of work. And the reason why today is special is because our guest, Noah Smith, accomplished economist, neoliberal pundit. I don't know what we call you now. What was the thing? Neoliberal shill. That's what you are. Not a pundit, a shill. Or not a shill, who writes for Bloomberg and has a blog. And we'll talk more about that. And has definitely helped me see many issues more clearly, is going to be here with us. We've got a first question that we're going to ask, but we may rapid fire on many more. And so if you want to comment on LinkedIn, Twitter, wherever you are, yes, he's also a rabbit lover. That's true. We already have one of your fans here. I think that came in through Periscope. So feel free to comment there. We may ask your questions as well. All right, but Noah, so here we go. The first question is, I'm a CEO. What do I need to know about economics?
Really depends on what industry you're in. In general, probably nothing.
Well, okay. So what's the most ignorant I could be and get away with it? Like, pick an industry where I don't need to know very much, or one where I need to know a ton. Give me some examples.
Oh, well, so if you're doing anything involving like, interest rates, if you're in real estate, you absolutely have to understand how, the Federal Reserve is going to affect interest rates, because real estate people really live or die by interest rates.
And so, sorry, keep going.
Yeah, no, that's just an example. So then, but the thing is that, interest rates are important for everybody, but then most people don't really need to understand the mechanics of interest rates. Then again, if you're a CFO, you're always going to have to need to know that stuff.
Right. And so professional economists can't make accurate consensus predictions about things like interest rates, or maybe they can, you can correct me. But if I'm a hapless corporate executive and I don't have any ability to know where interest rates are going and they affect my industry, or predict some other factor, I'm in the construction industry and what's going to happen to the price of lumber or something like that. How do I thrive in my work, given that I can't predict the things that even for which the effects of which are so meaningful on my work, and I have no idea where they're going? Like, what should I do?
Oh, well, so it's less about predicting the future, and it's more about understanding the relationships of cause and effect. So
okay, so say more.
So in other words, did you ever read Liar's Poker, that book by Michael
I love
Lewis?
That book. Yeah.
Right. And remember when he goes and he wants to know more about bonds, and then some bond trader just gives him a quiz. He's like, when interest rates go up, which way do bond prices go? He's like, down. He's like, you're damn right. Now get me a cheeseburger. And then that's essentially what you have to know. You have to understand, if the Fed is going to cut interest rates, what does that do for our business?
Got it. Meaning that responding quickly to change as it happens in terms of consequences may be more important than anticipating that change.
That's exactly right. People who think that economics is about forecasting are wrong, because economics doesn't do macro forecasting very well. As a hedge fund trader friend of mine once said, all financially useful information costs money. That's why macro data is free. Because no one has really figured out how to forecast things like interest rates, like inflation, whatever.
I guess hence Bloomberg has a business of selling access to lots of useful things.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. So that makes sense to me. But then if that's the case, you have lots of followers in the business world who love to read your stuff on economics. Why do they do that if it's not that useful to them?
Well, okay. So there, the stuff that I write about is about a lot more than macroeconomics. It's about public policy things that people just care about. So, people care about like housing policy. People care about immigration policy. Those things matter. They matter for the economy. They matter for people. People read those and are interested as just sort of concerned citizens.
Sure.
But also it's brain food. It's like, if you're an engineer or, CEO in like tech or something, or if you're at a company that makes washing machines, you spend all your day thinking about washing machines, and you're like, I want to think about something else, but I don't just want to go duh and veg in front of like some some cartoons or whatever. Yeah, like
Ted Lasso.
I don't know who Ted Lasso is. Sorry,
you don't have Apple TV. Okay.
Yeah, I don't have Apple TV.
Or
So
Apple
instead,
Talk,
you could just
whatever
veg, but you want to do something that sort of keeps the flywheel of your brain spinning and allows you to do a little bit of thinking, but not so much that it strains your brain, but enough that it's kind of fun and that it keeps your brain a little hot until the next minute you have to think about washing machines again or whatever.
Where can they find your writing?
They can find my writing at the blog No Opinion, which is just like this, spelled just like this handle you see on the screen, at Bloomberg, obviously. I mean, that should go without saying. And then at Twitter, I guess, but I don't recommend anyone read my Twitter account because it's just dumb jokes all the time.
And love for rabbits. I mean, I think you're showing your humane side or your animalane side. I don't know which side that is. Okay, so here's another question. One of the public policy issues you've written about a lot has to do with housing and geographic differences between places, immigration and movements. If I am a professional thinking about where to live in terms of, forget about the life consideration side of it for a second. Obviously, that's most important. But if I'm just thinking professionally, where will I be best off? Does it matter where I live? And if so, where should I live?
Well, I mean, obviously, a lot of where you live is going to be determined by economic necessity. If you are, if you want to make it in tech, you can either be really good at what you do, or you can move to the Bay Area. Even if you're really good at what you do, you may want to move to the Bay Area. But the network effects of being in that industry cluster really are important. And if you're in the oil and gas industry, Houston's a good bet. And so there's job factors are just incredibly important, and the economics of sort of clustering and agglomeration are just really important. If you're in publishing, you're going to probably end up living in New York City.
So you are long mega city centers by industry, maybe is the way.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah. Obviously. Okay. And I think
remote work there's a whole bunch of people on Twitter who are like, free the atoms, go wherever you wish, and you're saying
a little of that is going to happen.
Yeah.
A little of that some of that is going to happen. And yet the pull of cities like San Francisco are still going to be just incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
There's no sign that these cities are like dropping in price, that people are abandoning them. There is remote work is going to erode things, but in the end, the number of people who are going to go fully remote is going to be relatively modest. A lot of people are going to go 2 days remote, 3 days remote, 1 day remote, whatever. Not a lot of people are going to go all remote all the time.
Well, and the thing about a few days a week remote, that of course, that governs then where you live, because I can't live in wherever if I need to be in the office 2 to 3 days a week.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So what you're going to see, I think, is more movement from cores to suburbs. And we've seen that during the pandemic year. We're going to see move from cores to suburbs because if you're only going into work 2 days a week, you can afford to commute a little longer on the 2 days you do go. And you can afford to have a nicer house, a bigger place to maybe raise some kids. People, when they think about where would be cool to live, they're thinking about themselves at like 25, going and living in like some fun city with lots of bars. And I'm like, well, statistically, most people are older than that in the workforce. And, most people are thinking like, where can I have a park? Where can I walk my dog and meet other people who are walking their dogs? Where can I have like a nice quiet cafe on the corner of a leafy street and stuff like that? And of course, as a nation, our challenge is to figure out how to give people those amenities without single family zoning and, exclusionary sort of housing policy that we've seen.
And not to mention the deleterious effects on the climate of lots of car commuting. Okay, so
Absolutely.
One of the things you raised is that people read your stuff because of, I just call it the desire to be a good citizen effect. I want to be knowledgeable. I want to explore these issues I care about. A very hot topic in the last year has been which political conversations are appropriate for work and inappropriate for work. Do you have a view on this?
No, because to be honest, like I'm one of the few people who works fully remote. And then, when I'm in the office, it's with like you. So for example,
right. You can talk about whatever you want.
I know. So when you and I are working in the same office, what is off limits to us?
Yeah, essentially nothing. To others, some obvious extremes on which people agree.
Right. We have to limit behavior. We can't make fun of British people too much because Lisa's there. But other than that, like
Lisa would be here in the frame if she wanted to be, but she.
I know. Well,
We try.
Lisa.
Now she's shaking her head backstage.
No.
You can't see, but I can.
Apparently,
no, it's true. We can't make fun of British people too much. Not to mention Bloomberg. I mean, we got a big UK presence and all that stuff. All right, you get calls all the time. You talk to investors. You talk to congressmen and women, Congress people. You talk to business executives. What are things you find yourself explaining over and over that you just wish these people who called you looking for insight actually understood? Do you get frustrated by re-explaining the same stuff, or you feel like, no, they pretty much get it?
No, well, they don't get it. There's a lot of stuff people don't get. But then I don't expect them to have gotten most of this. Like, I'm not frustrated. It's incredibly difficult to get good information out to people because of several reasons. Number one is people don't have much time. Number two, there's just so much crap being thrown around, all the time. But number three, it's just because stuff is hard to understand.
Things are complicated. Okay, what's hard to understand? Let's talk about that, because I feel like a major subtext of our modern communication environment is, you moron, don't you just get it? Things are easy. So I'm curious. Right. And by the way, Make America Nuanced again. If that weren't like an unfortunate reference, it'd be hard to communicate that in a way that didn't trigger people. I might say that would be one of my mantras. But what do you feel like are the things that are hard enough to understand that are worth really devoting the time to trying to understand it?
What you mean, in economics or just in life?
Well, the things you explain, you feel like you have some expertise on: economics, public policy.
Okay. So, I mean, for example, on each issue, there's these points that need to be sort of hammered home. So, for example, on immigration, the thing that people almost never understand is that everyone thinks about immigration as this positive labor supply shock. They think all these workers move in. If that were all it would drive wages down. The thing is, what people don't understand is also positive labor demand shock, because immigrants buy stuff.
Buy things.
They buy things, and with the money they earn at the jobs that they work, then they go and spend that money and they buy things. And they buy houses or rent, and they buy stuff for the houses, and they buy cars, and they buy all this stuff. And that provides this big demand shock. So you're getting an increase in labor supply, but you're also getting an increase in labor demand. And that's something that almost no one who thinks about immigration understands. The debates are dominated by people who think of immigration only in terms of labor supply and not in terms of labor demand. Back, in the Depression, we kicked a bunch of people out.
Is that the same issue with the housing folks who believe that, the NIMBYs who believe that if you build more housing, the price of their house will come down? Do they not see that also increases demand? Or is that something else?
No, that's something different. So that is a theory called induced demand. It's the idea that if you build an apartment building in this neighborhood, one of those nice big fancy fish tank type apartments like Nema in San Francisco, right? If you build an apartment like that, then a whole bunch of yuppies will say, oh my gosh, this neighborhood's happening. This is hip. Let's all move there. And then so they all move there. And then there's a big demand shock, and it raises prices in that area. That could happen. Stuff like that occasionally does happen. You see when people build big freeway interchanges, then people are like, oh, I might as well drive now. And then you get more people switch from transit to driving, and then
there's always the same amount of traffic once people set up more lanes on the highway or whatever.
Something like that, right?
Yeah.
But it turns out that you just have to look at the evidence, and the evidence doesn't show much induced demand in terms of neighborhood stuff. You don't get this yuppie flood when you build the big yuppie fish tank. Instead, what you do is you draw people into the fish tank, but you draw them away from sort of existing properties. Instead, what you do is you prevent the yuppies from going and gentrifying a bunch of working class people out of their homes and, bidding up the prices on those homes. And you just pull them out and you put them in the fish tank. And that turns out to be the dominant effect.
One of the common things you're describing here, and I think this is so true, is so many changes we love to assess, and this is true of strategic changes in business and many others, as if they only have one effect, the most noticeable effect that they have.
Right.
And in fact, many of them have many countervailing effects. It's a complex system, hard to get at, et cetera, et cetera. All right.
A lot of times you have to look at the data. All right. So here's another one. Climate. So many people think about decarbonization in terms of sacrificing growth for the environment, the trade-off between the economy and the environment. And if you went back to 2010, that was absolutely real. That was absolutely true. And the reason people still think it is because they're still in the 2010 mindset, which is a lot better than like
in the 70s mindset of like, slow down all the growth. But keep going. All right, what changed?
That didn't really change by 2010. Things were changing underneath the surface.
What changed?
But they hadn't.
The price of energy?
Yes, exactly. So what happened was that for 40 years, a ton of really smart, hardworking people had been pouring their energy into figuring out how to make energy, into figuring out how to make solar power cheaper, to make wind power cheaper, to make batteries cheaper. And suddenly these technologies just hit this price point. And around the early 2010s, like 2011, 2012, where everyone's just like, okay, holy shit, this is for real. This isn't just some 70s joke anymore. But it took so long to get there. It was such a hard slog. I mean, this stuff was decreasing by 90% in price every decade for multiple decades, and it just kept coming down. And yet when you're still orders of magnitude away, you're still a joke. Sure. You're like, okay, we're 1,000 times too expensive. You're a joke. You're 100 times too expensive.
Are we at the Alfred E. Newman stage with climate change then, in your opinion? Of like, well, now it's cheap enough. The market's going to take care of itself. What, me worry?
No, because, well, there are two reasons why not. There's three reasons, among the many reasons. First of all, there's the fact that it's not going to happen fast enough without sort of government input. And it should happen fast, but it's not going to happen fast enough. There's a couple of reasons for that. One reason is short-termism. So companies that, if you scrap your coal plant and buy solar now, you'll cut a profit in 20 years from now or something. They're thinking about next earnings call or whatever. So the short-termism, there's stuff, the government needs to do stuff that's complementary to it, like building a really good transmission grid so that you can pump in power from wherever the sun is shining and the wind is blowing, blah, blah, blah. So there's complementary stuff there. There's also other countries. And so there's politically powerful industries. So it's the coal industry just got small enough where it's going to be thwackable. And, we're just going to say, okay, you 40,000 remaining coal miners in America, you get new jobs now. That's it.
Yeah.
That's going to be fine. But the oil industry in America, that employs, millions of people. So millions of people are going to have to find new jobs.
We have a whole state, Texas.
We have a whole state, Texas. I'm from Texas, and it's going to be. I've written about this. That transition is going to be hard.
Why are so many successful people in the business world openly hostile to government and government action?
Well, because they, in terms of the individual incentives affecting their firms, government regulation is a threat. So, government regulation might make the sort of the industry better overall, but in terms of their firm,
narrow view, not the systemic view.
Right. So, for example, non-competes. So, if you ban non-compete clauses, then every business is like, oh my God, my workers are going to leave and take all their specialized knowledge with them and blah, blah, blah. But the thing is, if all the workers can do that from all the companies, the whole industry benefits. So the tech industry in California has benefited massively from the fact that non-competes are not enforceable in the state of California.
Yeah, I've posed this thought experiment before, by the way, which is if non-competes were allowed, enforceable in California right now, which they are not, and the governor said, I'm going to ban non-competes, I guarantee you the current business community would scream in pain about that. When in reality, one of the reasons California has been as competitive as it's been is because of that very factor. So your answer is local incentives versus general incentives. Does that govern business leaders' responses to organized labor too? How do you feel about how should business leaders respond to organized labor?
Well, organized labor is an interesting case because there's this idea called sectoral bargaining, which is basically so take a McDonald's, right?
No, you told McDonald's me about this Marty Manley book right here, which I have yet to read.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, that's the one. Keep
there
going.
You go. So sectoral bargaining, basically, you have McDonald's, and McDonald's is thinking about whether to unionize, and the McDonald's managers will fight the union really hard because they think, okay, if we have to raise our wages, it'll mean we have to raise our prices. If we have to raise our prices, we won't be competitive with the Burger King down the street. We've got to stay competitive with the Burger King down the street. Sectoral bargaining says, okay, all the fast food restaurants in the entire city of Miami or whatever now have to sort of come together at the table and bargain for the same minimum wage or whatever. And so then they do, and then the competitive threat goes away. So each individual workplace.
Minimum wage for Uber and Lyft drivers in New York, how they raised, they created a minimum wage, and then you're not competing on price anymore, basically.
Exactly. And so you'll always have just the direct cost issue, but you won't have this competitive issue where if you get a union and nobody else does, you're dead. Now, there's a big problem here, which is that we can't do sectoral bargaining across nations. And that's just not a thing we can do. So in other words, suppose we unionize the whole, like, aircraft sector, auto sector, whatever. We're not, the people in China won't concomitantly be unionized. They won't be under the same collective bargaining.
Meaning there is a international,
the people in South Korea, the people in Germany. Here. That's right. And so because of that international aspect to it, that means that export-oriented industries can have trouble with unionization because they can be
a services industry or something like that, then it may be different.
Right.
And so sorry.
But that's the thing with the industries we have unionization in are manufacturing, which is very exportable, and government. Right. What we don't have unions in are exactly the things we need unions in the most, services, which are like McDonald's and Walmart.
And so you believe we ought to have more unions in those sectors. Do you think it's possible to imagine a labor union? This is a James Cham favorite question. That actually improves the performance of the company where it shows up from an economics perspective or from your
Sure, it's called Germany.
So tell us about Germany.
Right.
Because I hear good things about the German model and mixed things about the German model. What is the German model?
Well, okay, so the German model, they have some sectoral bargaining and blah blah blah. The interesting thing is that the German model, the unions in the export companies, in the export-oriented industries in Germany, they bargain to keep wages down. Because for reasons of international competitiveness. And the trade-off is employment. You get more employment and more secure employment, and people don't lose their jobs, and you can hire more people if wages are lower. Now, it's not just lower wages as much as possible. It's just keep wages low enough so that China is not beating us on price, things like that. So German unions will bargain for wage rises when applicable, but they're very they're included in the management process. They're included in the deliberation process. Germany has this thing called co-determination, where labor actually goes to the corporate board meetings and understands strategy and the constraints. So when the company's under extreme price pressure from China, they don't have to hear that at the labor negotiation meeting when it could just be bullshit. Yeah. Right? It could just be management bullshitting you to avoid paying you more.
History on this is that in the grand bargain that defined the modern American employment contract, which was the bargain between the UAW and the big three post-World War II, co-determination was the last thing that the unions in the US conceded on and said they didn't need. I mean, not didn't need, but we're willing to concede, given it. So your suggestion is that was a mistake.
That was a mistake. And because when labor understands the constraints that management is operating under, then it creates less bad faith adversarial negotiation and more good faith win-win negotiation, because you go to the board meetings and you understand that management, would like to put factories here, but just can't because the cost is just too high. It doesn't pencil in. And then labor can be like, okay, well, we'll reduce wages here in exchange for some other kind of benefits, job security, more, higher wages for these other people, whatever. So labor knows when it's killing the goose and when it's not.
Got it. You just wrote about this question related to this, not directly related, but indirectly related. Big companies. Are big companies better?
Well, so the thing is that I don't think we can categorically say some big companies are better.
Well, sure.
If you look at productivity, you see that big companies are a little more productive than your average company. So Google is more productive than your average software company. But not like
productivity in this case measured by output, revenue per employee.
Revenue per employee, right. Stuff like that.
Got it. Sorry, keep going.
Sales per employee, profit per employee, all these kind of measures. You can do a whole bunch of different things. Change in market cap. I don't know, whatever you want. But yeah, let's say revenue per employee. And so Google's a little bit better than like the rest of the software industry as a whole. But if you look at the real superstars of the companies that are really super productive, they have sales of like $50 million. They are small companies. I mean, not small, but like they're medium.
So it sort of suggests that there might be different places along that the relationship between productivity and size may not look like a smooth line, but maybe that given the industry you're in, it makes sense. A 50-person company might have special powers that a 10-person company doesn't, and a 500-person company may not. And a 50,000 person company may have other special powers that.
Right. But it's not just about size either, because you get a big dispersion of productivity among the different companies, even at size levels.
Sure.
So at the $50 million range, you'll see some crappy companies and you'll see some amazing companies.
Sure.
So you'll see that as well. And you'll see that among the big companies too, although of course you can't have as much a dispersion there because there's not that many Googles in the world. So the answer is, how much are big companies adding to productivity growth? So it turns out that big companies have been getting bigger within their industries, bigger within America in terms of percentages. They're taking over more resources. And that, because they're a little bit more productive than your average company, that actually is raising overall productivity a little bit.
General welfare, so to speak.
Right. It's raising overall productivity a little bit. But in the last 20 years, the amount that companies have raised their own productivity, the amount that big companies have raised their own productivity has really collapsed. So big companies have essentially stopped getting more productive.
Meaning they stopped investing. Who knows why?
Who knows why? Well, we can look into the particular reasons. But then, they have stopped. They have reduced their investment a lot. And of course, there's also sectoral shifts among who are the big companies, things like that. So in the 80s and 90s, we see big companies becoming massively more productive. If we think about it, why? Well, number one, they're probably rationalizing operations and outsourcing. Number two, they're buying a bunch of computers and training people how to use the computers. Those two things, outsourcing and computerization and internetization, drove huge productivity gains among your big companies, your Walmarts and your whatever. Then that process sort of runs its course, and American innovation as a whole sort of shifts toward smartphones and social networks and things that don't necessarily improve corporate productivity for big companies a lot. You could still have very productive companies that make those things for consumers, but then in terms of, actually enhancing operational productivity at the big companies, maybe not as important. And so then you get this complete collapse in how fast big companies are increasing their
and then we got this
productivity.
Question from Adam. Sorry, finish your thought. And then
I'm about to actually talk about that. So what you see at the same time, though, is they're increasing their market shares and they're increasing their profits. So big company profits just go way up, even as their sales per employee kind of crater and their productivity growth craters.
Meaning it's all going to the shareholders and management.
Right. Yes, it's all going to the shareholders and management, but more importantly, where are they getting these profits? They're probably we don't really know, but given that they're not growing their productivity faster than before, but they're making more profit than before, probably monopoly. So it's probably the structure of markets has changed.
For those who may not be as economically familiar, how do you get a profit from monopoly?
Jack up prices.
Okay. No competition, you increase your price.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that also involves limiting production, by the way. So that's why monopolies are kind of economically inefficient, because they underproduce in order to jack up price.
All right. Then we have
artificial scarcity.
Unions are just like monopolies.
Unions, so unions are monopolies at the level of the single company.
Of the firm level.
Yes. But then overall in the labor market, unions are not monopolies. Because you have unions at every McDonald's. So they're not monopolies at all. However, the kind of sectoral bargaining that I've been suggesting for like local service industries are absolutely monopolies.
You and Marty Manley.
That is a monopoly. And so in other words, I've been suggesting monopolies as a way to combat monopsony. So
that's been, one of the arguments for unions in that context, especially in a public sector context, is you got a monopsony buyer buying labor. You need a monopoly seller.
Right. And so if you can't, so labor market power exists. It's real. It's big. Give, among corporations, give some labor market power to workers to balance things out. That's the idea.
But trade associations, for example, or trade unions that, for example, limit access to who can become a welder. Do those feel to you like monopolies?
They are. They really are. So occupational licensing is definitely, monopoly kind of thing.
Right. And that's
a monopoly-like thing.
Not necessarily
right.
a union thing.
Non-competes.
Concert.
Non-compete, same thing. Trade associations, maybe. You can...
Yeah, it depends on what their power is to set
Right,
access.
right. So
the American Medical Association is probably a monopoly of doctor supply.
It is.
Yeah.
Right.
And so, I mean, I think what I hear you saying is, in general, you think there are many circumstances where we need more organized labor. And there are obviously these problematic cases where there may be harms that need to be addressed, or, hey, it's nuanced. There's more than one effect. That's the kind of net of that. Is that right?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Okay. And so, they say it's okay. They still love you, Noah. So you're good. All right. Can I move to another topic?
Absolutely.
What are the things that you believe you have wisdom on for working people that people should listen to you more on? I'll give you one example to start out, which is you've talked about writing and some of your techniques on writing. Are there other things, or you want to talk about writing? What are before we lose you on this, we want to get you back whenever you want to come back. But before we lose you on this, what are the things we should be asking you for wisdom on that I don't know enough to ask you for?
Oh, well, I mean, you can, for example, you can have my negative wisdom, which is don't do all the things that I did. Don't go to grad school. Don't do all these things. Don't become a writer. Do not become a writer for money. It's not going to work. It works for a few people, but they just get really lucky.
Yeah.
I got really lucky.
Why we call it "This Is Not Advice" is because you're telling people what to do, but really what you're saying is, here's my life story. I would like you to make me feel better about my own choices by not making them, so that I can feel less pain from them.
Yes. And so, I mean, if I had just gone the normal, route for people in my college class and been a director at Google now, I would be making $2 million a year.
Do you think you would be happier?
I don't know. You never know. You never know. We don't even know.
You can never run the counterfactual.
You can never run it. So this is why you never ask successful people. If you can always ask them. Successful people, you can always ask them, how did you succeed? What made you succeed? If they're being honest, they'll tell you, I do not know.
Of course they don't know.
Because they have n equals 1. That's right. And so you ask, also they're not introspective enough. I mean, like, there's people who obviously have some secret sauce of success, like Elon Musk keeps succeeding at things, but
he has said his special skill is email, which is why I am working on my 10,000 fucking hours.
Right. He doesn't actually know what his special sauce is. He's too busy applying it to study it.
Yes. Although, speaking of a guy who sometimes
maybe his chief of staff knows
lots of government funded work off of which he has become quite wealthy, including the government contracts for SpaceX as customer.
Sure. There's no rich person in the world that doesn't apply to.
Yeah.
Every rich person in the world, except for maybe a Somali warlord, except for Somali warlords are the only true. Pardon?
I said, I am unfamiliar with many Somali warlords, so I'm going to take that on faith.
I used to have a bunch of Somali warlord friends, and then we drifted apart. But except for Somali warlords, there's really no rich person in the entire world who doesn't get rich with a strong, helping of government stuff. Does that mean that rich people's fortunes are illegitimate? Not necessarily, no.
Not any more than if you play a game of Monopoly and you win. I have Parker Brothers or whoever makes Monopoly, Hasbro, to thank for it. But, I still won the game.
Right. Exactly right.
Yeah. All right, so next subject, race.
Yes. All right.
You have written in waves a lot about racism in this country, identity among groups, and how it intersects with the economy. Here we are, two, white guys talking to each other. And I'm curious for
fellow white man.
Yeah, well, for those who may be watching, if somebody wanted to get I'd actually just love to hear your perspective. How do you think about the intersection of race and economic possibility? Let's just take in the American context right now.
Well, I mean, so obviously the biggest problem here is that when people, when racial divisions make a country less effective. Because if you're thinking about, for example, economically, yeah. If you're talking about,
as I would say, their racism is my profit opportunity. If they won't back somebody and we can and earn a return, great.
That's it, right? That's the famous Gary Becker idea of individual discrimination. So if nobody is hiring like Korean employees, and you're like, hey, because they don't like them, they're like, Koreans. You're like, I like Koreans. I'm going to hire some Koreans. These Koreans are the best, and then you get money, and then you have an edge, and so that's absolutely true.
The economists,
but that's not the main. That's not the main thing that's going on. This individual discrimination thing It used to be. It really used to be. So when you hear old people talk about racism as individual discrimination, that is because in 1955 that was insanely important. Everybody's you are a black guy, you go to work, apply to work at some company, and they're like, I don't like you because you are black, I will not hire you. That was how it was in 1955. And so that's this racism as individual discrimination. But there's other kinds of stuff that's really important. So for example, one big reason why the United States doesn't have the kind of welfare state that European countries have is because, to be perfectly honest, Republicans managed to convince a large number of white people, or at least take advantage of a large number of white people who already were convinced that black people didn't deserve welfare. And that is not related to discrimination against any individual, but all these voters thought that black people as a class are welfare mooches and welfare queens and whatever the Ronald Reagan ad was, I don't remember. So then that became the stereotype, and that idea, and Rush Limbaugh said that Obamacare was racial reparations. And every single thing that you'd have government do for the country as a whole, for poor people, yes, but also just for the country as a whole, anything you'd have the government do, the Republican voters, and not just Republican voters, some Democratic voters too, obviously, but primarily Republican voters would just think, oh my gosh, this is going to give black people a free handout they don't deserve. And so they'd scuttle it. And so they'd use the filibuster to scuttle it, and they'd scuttle it whatever way they could, and they'd scuttle it. And so that's been a big problem. And it's especially a big problem when you get to government investment, stuff like public goods. When you start worrying that stuff like infrastructure is going to benefit. Yeah, like the ITC, that's right. When you start worrying that infrastructure is going to benefit the wrong people that you don't like, then that's really bad. Then infrastructure doesn't get built. And of course, at the local level, that could happen. What this guy mentioned was the EITC. I was standing in a line in an airport in I think it was 2017, or maybe it's 2018, I don't remember. But then these guys from Louisiana just started talking about the EITC, and they were complaining about people who took the EITC as moochers, because they said they just work enough so that they can get the benefit, and they don't work anymore. Of course, the EITC is set up so that you have to work to get the benefit. And so you just work enough to get the benefit and then don't work anymore. It does not work like that. Mm-hmm. And in the phase-in thing, the more work you do, the more benefit you get. And then after that, you can work more and keep whatever you earn without getting any more benefit.
Michael Tubbs, who was the mayor of Stockton when they introduced their guaranteed income program.
Oh, yeah, Tubbs.
Yeah, right.
I interviewed him for my blog.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's right. That was great. People should subscribe. He kept pointing out all of these inherently, I don't know if he used the word racist, he may have, but certainly classist, again, my word, not his, assumptions people would make. It's like, you hand people money, they're going to work less. It's like, actually, no, you hand some people money, they work more because they can't search for a job because they don't have enough money to take some time off to search for a job. And right. So, that's the beginning indications of what they saw in Stockton. And so, I think the big picture of what I hear you saying is that our country's racism is costing us enormously. In addition to being morally wrong, you're speaking as an economist saying there is actually financial cost to us as a nation, which I think unquestionably true.
I mean, I think racism is morally wrong. And at the same time, I think there's too many people in America who have sort of made their identity around the idea that they have to fight a race war on Twitter. Or whatever,
on either side, on any side,
on both sides, yes. Right. And so there's just too many race warriors in America, because ultimately, yes, racism is morally wrong.
The N in Noah is for nuance. You got to fucking stop that. We need to call you SOA for simplify. People on both sides, huh?
Yes. Okay. Well, so let me be specific. I see this among my friends a lot,
and I'm messing with you because
I think you're right. So I'm going to say that the praxis of fighting racism is not necessarily to go on Twitter and scream that stuff is racist all the time.
Right.
That is not.
When you say
racism
praxis,
is bad.
Let's talk words.
Racism is bad. Praxis means the method,
tradecraft of causing change. The
tradecraft of causing change. There are limitations to the method, to the technology of going on Twitter and screaming that everything's racist all the time.
Question.
It's just but at the same time, I mean, sometimes that does win victories, like, you get more representation in movies and stuff. But the thing is that most of the big structures, I think, don't get changed that way.
I guess my view is it's a tapestry where there's, I'm going to mix metaphors, but where there's timing and dosage, which is a frequent theme we talk about here, where it's like, does the structure get changed that way single-handedly? No. Is some of that conversation an essential ingredient for creating the environment that allows the structure to change? Yeah, probably. And so it's a timing and dosage thing.
Who knows? But the point is that in terms of the attitudes of racial division in America are harmful to us economically, above and beyond the moral harms of racism.
Yeah.
There is economic harm of this. And someday, if Democrats start vetoing programs because they're afraid that white people will benefit, or that Trumpy conservative people will benefit, if that happens and they start vetoing infrastructure programs or whatever welfare state stuff that helps those people, that will be bad for our country if that happens. But so far, almost all of it that I know has really been from the Republican side about saying black people, specifically, occasionally they throw in Hispanics in there, but black people are unworthy to receive government benefits and help. Yeah. And that toxic idea has really held us back as a country for half a century now.
Yeah. And I mean, at least I'll just say, as a person who's part of a community like you, who people at a certain time in our country's history would not hire, Jews, I feel a lot of desire to keep this issue front and center. And I walked past this sign yesterday that said, think we're talking too much about racism. Imagine how it feels to experience it. And it doesn't mean you just shout down every person on Twitter for anything that might be vaguely something, but it does mean that this conversation generally being central is important. All right. Last thing, unless you got stuff for me, is it important to focus on your personal productivity? You write a bunch of stuff. You have a bunch of conversations. I see you as a person who is effective in getting useful things done. Do you focus on your own productivity? And if so, how?
I don't.
That's kind of what I thought. Why not? Yeah. There's so much stuff out there. And I'm not suggesting you should. I'm curious how you chose not to.
It's more like I don't really know how I would. Like, I know how to write productively. I know how to structure my day productively. But in terms of, so what I don't do is now I will take half an hour at the beginning of the day and survey, the topics of the day for important topics that I need to write about that will get maximum engagement, blah, blah, blah.
What do you do?
I read Twitter. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. What do I think about this? I think I'll write about that. Yeah. I generate 2 topics for every one topic I write about. And no matter how much I write, if I write more and more and more, I still keep generating more and more. I still keep generating 2 topics for every topic I write about.
That's like my reading list. I buy 2 books for every 0.2 books that I read.
Right. And so that in Japanese, that's called tsundoku, by the way.
Oh,
but
wait,
then
tell us.
Tsundoku, it just basically means like piling up the books.
Oh, there's a word specifically for that in books. Holy shit, I knew this session was going to be useful. I remember that time I asked you about the Japanese expression of reading the air. And I said, I think this sounds so interesting. You're like,
Kuki-omenai.
The room in English. And it's like, oh, I see. Yes. So
indeed.
Tsundoku. I love it.
All right. So the answer is that because I'm basically a bum, I probably should go looking for like the most important things to write about. But then the thing is that I'm not sure that I can sustain that forever.
Well, I think that you're making an important point, which goes back to the thing at the very beginning when I asked, what does a CEO need to know about economics? And the real answer was it depends on their industry. And depending on the role, a different attitude toward productivity is completely important. If I am in a role where my job is to make something happen as rapidly as possible, if I'm a customer success manager who has to answer tickets or something like that, I may be very different from a job where I have a hybrid of thinking of things creatively and knocking stuff out, or a job like yours where the main value is generating original thinking,
Right.
Yeah. To each their own. All right. Anything else you want to talk about before we wrap?
No, I think we're good.
We are good. How are the rabbits?
The rabbits are good. They're sleeping under the bed right now.
All right. We'll talk more topics next time, including perspectives on everything from mental health to the Biden administration and other things. And for now, I'll just say, for those of you who are tuning in for the first time and have made it till now, which I can see in our stats, many of you have, the reason we call this series This Is Not Advice, and you should follow both Noah and me on the Twitters or the LinkedIns or wherever you use the internet. Maybe Noah doesn't use LinkedIn, but I do. Is the reason we call it this is we're just sharing our perspectives. Our perspectives are biased and personal, and we have N of one, and we're not trying to tell you how to live your life. So thanks, everybody. And if you have a question for us that you want to tackle on a future day, or a guest you want us to have, find me on Twitter. We really do, take all that as our source of questions.